We say things like, maybe later, perhaps another time, or I'll see you tomorrow. But for some of us, there won't be a tomorrow. Listen as your worst nightmares come to life. These nightmares have become someone's reality. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of The Murder Project. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the murder in Rattlesnake Canyon, the Raffi Kodikian and David Coughlin story. For those of you that are new to the podcast, The Debrief is an episode where I sit down with my good friend and former police officer, Mike Smith, to discuss these cases further. In The Debrief, we will discuss the case from both sides of the aisle, theories that we might have, and anything we think might need a second look. The Debrief will be an unscripted and off-the-cuff commentary about the cases that we are currently covering. The hope of The Debrief is to also break the case down further, but in a sort of relaxed environment with the true crime that we love and also some laughter. So let's get the episode started. My man, Mike Smith, in the house. How you doing, sir?
What's up, buddy? I'm doing all right. I'm ready to talk about this because this, like many cases that we choose to talk about, is one where you're just, at some points, speechless.
Yeah.
You're just like, man, that's so terrible that this happened. And then, of course, you know, guys and girls like us, our brains just go wild trying to figure out what could have prevented this and things like that. So it's definitely something good to talk about because there's a good bit of information that I feel like we could share and that some people out there probably need to hear it.
Oh, for sure. And I want to go ahead and point out at the beginning that if any of the things that we're saying come off as maybe condescending or maybe rude or anything, especially towards the dead in this case, that's not the intent. The intent is to talk about the case, how it unfolded, how everything happened. And unfortunately, in most scenarios, the reason we like to do the debrief, there were errors that were done. And all we're trying to do is kind of point that out. We're not trying to, cast any shade on anybody or the situation that they were in. But
no victim blaming.
Yeah, the scenario that these two guys were in, it was a catastrophic failure. And it needs to be talked about, basically. So
yeah, for sure. In episode 1, you did a great job covering it, and there were a couple points where you just had like great word use, and you never seemed like you were struggling to figure out what word to use, and so I feel like you did a really good job getting the point across.
Thanks, man.
Especially talking about how the danger that they were already in that they didn't even know about, going into a desert atmosphere in August. Anybody around the southwest of the United States knows that August it's hot.
It is brutally hot.
Yeah, it's brutally hot. I mean, you're triple digis from time to time, but you're 90s, high 80s and 90s almost all the time.
Every day, unless something crazy happens. Like I know, like when I'm mowing and it's 85, I'm like, oh man, what a good day.
Yeah, that is a good day.
During this time of the year, it's so hot.
Yeah, you get so used to working in the heat in this region that when a day is 85 degrees is an off day for you, and you can physically feel the difference of sweating in 95 degrees versus sweating in 85.
Yeah, and then you take into account that these guys are out camping. They have minimal supplies. They do not know where they're at, and they do not know how to read a topography map. All of these things kind of building up and adding on that extra pressure and stress. And I think it ultimately gets them into a state of mind where they feel like no matter what happens, they are doomed.
I did feel like there were a few things that were hard to find. We say and refer to where they went and did as camping, but did they have any other gear?
In one of the things I read, I read that they went back to their tent. And so I'm thinking, and like if I forgot to bring it up in the episode, I apologize, but I said that they were probably doing some minimalist camping with minimal gear. But unfortunately, I had to record this episode 2 times. I recorded it the first time, and after I finished it, I was trying to save the podcast to my external hard drive, and Audacity crashed, and I lost the whole thing.
Oh, my Lord.
And I tried for 2 hours to get it back because I always felt like I was right around the corner from getting it.
Mm-hmm.
And actually locating all of the files and putting them together and trying to get it back, and I never did. And so by the time I finished, I was extremely upset because 2 hours had gone by, and I thought, God dang, I could have just recorded the whole podcast again
Right.
while I was just sitting here trying to find it.
With time to burn.
With time to burn, and I could have been in the editing process. So it was hard for me to remember what I said in one or the other, and kind of like an unconscious thing where I was trying not to repeat myself, but I was redoing the whole episode over. So I may not have brought that up, but I think they had some camping gear, but definitely not definitely not a lot.
I mean, even sleeping in a tent in the desert-like conditions is miserable. I went to Quartz Lake in Oklahoma some years ago, and it was during a triple-digit day. I think it was 106 during the day, which it's hot.
That's hot.
The lake was there, so there was some relief. But then that night, even with the sun down and a light breeze in the trees, I could not sleep.
No.
I was sweating, laying there.
That's like going to the Palo Duro Canyon. You know, I've been down there during the summertime several times, and the last time I was down there was for a event that I'll go ahead and give them a free plug, but it's called 24 Hours in the Canyon, and it is a organization that supports cancer survivors and things of that nature. And it is usually the 1st of June, and it's, 100 degrees during the day. At 10 p.m., it's still 90.
Yeah.
And then as it kind of gets into the cooler part, you're looking at high 80s. And if you're in a tent, it is just it's miserable.
Yeah, it's
no matter how
miserable.
you look at it. And so I think even these guys, kind of with their primitive camping gear, or maybe not primitive, but, what was it? What did I say?
Minimal.
Minimal camping gear. They were in a bad spot.
So,
especially with the amount of supplies they had.
So David and Raffi, they knew they were traveling. I don't know, but we can assume that they did do similar things back where they're from.
Yes.
Which, guys, the difference between Carlsbad Caverns area, New Mexico, and anywhere around Massachusetts is worlds apart when you're talking geographically.
Yes.
We talked about it briefly as we were discussing the episode before while we were getting set up. And the thing about living in a wooded area or a place that does have a lot more trees and bushes and, water and things that stand out to you like trails. When you live in a forested region, trails are easier to spot in my experience because I'm from the Pacific Northwest originally.
Yep.
So I grew up around lots of trees, lots of mountains. Camping was basically going out in the middle of the woods and staying for 4 or 5 days in a pup tent while it poured rain, and you had to bathe in a river and cook your food over the fire was a vacation in my family growing up. That was actually what we did for fun. I'm not a professional at it by any means, but I definitely feel like I have a better skill set than the person that doesn't do that.
Yeah, the average person.
Right.
Your average city dweller.
So coming from a place like that I left the military and of course went, to many different regions of America and the world. You learn very quickly in like a desert region, you can almost have no idea what you're looking at. Yeah. Everything looks like a trail because it's all just dirt and rock and sagebrush and yuccas and mesquite.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this is that even if you're in a wooded area, like you said, it kind of seems like the trails are better visible. You can see them better.
Yeah, because there ain't any bushes. Where there ain't bushes, somebody probably been walking.
And what is so kind of upsetting when you get into an area like that kind of desert climate is you can see for miles around you and have no idea where you are, and nothing looks familiar. And to me, that almost seems like that is worse.
That is worse. And so I'm going to take another step back. So we brought up that part about, the difference in geography. So even if they had experience camping, they're stepping into an entirely different form of camping. I learned my lesson the hard way too with when I went to Quartz Lake. It was miserable. I paid for 3 days. We stayed for 1 and I was like, I can't deal with this. We're leaving.
Yeah.
But they took 3 pints of water, so 3 bottles of water, 1 bottle of Gatorade, and 1 pack of weenies. And they did purchase a topographical map, but from what we've gathered, neither of them knew how to read it. Now that we'll talk about that later, because that's a huge thing to talk about.
Was I saying that wrong this whole time?
Yeah.
Topography?
It is a map of topography, but it is referred to as a topographical map.
Gotcha. Okay. So you learn something new every day.
And so they didn't have a fire so they must have had a stove. Is that what we're assuming?
Yeah. I
actually could not find the answer to that.
I couldn't find the answer to that either. And my only thought was and this is completely just kind of up in the air, speculation, but I couldn't figure out why they would boil the hot dogs. And so I thought, okay, well, was there a burn ban in effect, or was there something? Did they have a cooking stove?
Well, they had to have something. We know that.
Why would you not just roast the weenies over an open fire versus putting them in a pot or something and boiling the hot dog weenies?
So that makes me believe that they had maybe like one of those little propane burners.
Propane stoves, yeah.
Right. And then that's what they boiled the water on to cook the weenies, which is really unfortunate. And there's something I thought of course, that you would think of with the right mindset and training that unfortunately they didn't think of. And that's sad.
I would never.
But we'll get there.
Yeah, I would never waste the water to boil hot dogs.
Mm-mm.
And it's only assumed that hot dog weenie water is absolutely disgusting. Like they probably pitched it as soon as they were done cooking the hot dogs. And
so didn't even think about it.
Yeah, for all purposes, that water was wasted. And then they only had 3 bottles to begin with.
Well, so I'm going to go ahead and include the Gatorade as a whole. So they had 4 bottles of water. So the 3 water and the 1 Gatorade. I'm just going to bunch them all up. 4 bottles of hydration fluid for 2 grown men over the course that would end up being 3 days and change. That's I drink more than on one day during one day at work, and certainly back when I was mowing, and you could probably attest to that. I'd probably drink nearly a gallon a day.
I drink a gallon of water every day,
and that's being active. So you can cut that in half if you were just chilling.
Yeah,
let's be fair and be like, on an off day, you're just drinking a half gallon out of habit on a day when you're not doing anything.
Especially if you're just
not
hanging
that
out
you
inside.
know what that is like.
Yeah, but if it's 100 degrees outside and you're in a desert climate and you don't have very much coverage, you're still going to be sweating.
Oh yeah,
all day,
easily. And so they did bring the map, but neither of them could read it, and so they start to be lost. And I think we said that they moved about a mile into the park from the road. And when you're talking about moving across terrain, doesn't seem very far, because heck, on a bike and a car, you can cross a mile in barely a couple minutes.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to put my dog outside.
Is that right? It was a mile from the road?
Yeah, when they parked their car at the trailhead, they walked, what it says is they hiked a mile into Rattlesnake Canyon and set up camp.
Okay, so carrying on with what I was saying, that's not a very long ways, but it is if you don't know what you're looking at or where you're going or what you're doing.
Yeah, with every step you go and you have no idea where you're going, you're getting further and further out into the nothingness.
So they become lost. They can't find their way back, and that's very unfortunate. And they keep trying to move in certain directions from their camp, because as you mentioned, they return to their camp.
Yeah.
So they head out trying to find help.
Yeah, you had an interesting theory about that, because I said in the part 1 episode, I was like, they could always find their way back to their campsite. So please elaborate on that.
So their campsite became something that they were comfortable with, that they were familiar with. And they're already
though they had no idea where they were,
right,
that was there.
Even though they're starting to feel the despair of possibly, perishing, they're thirsty. They're hungry. In fact, they get to the point where they are licking rocks for moisture and drinking their urine filtered through a ball cap and trying to eat and eating prickly pears.
Yeah.
or cactus fruit.
Cactus fruit.
Which I actually never even heard of a cactus fruit until I thought they were just called prickly pears. So
I've always just heard of them as prickly pears.
Same.
I've never heard of them
even
as anything
though
else.
I'm an import to Texas, I still only ever heard them referred to as a prickly pears. So they're hungry and they're thirsty and they're scared and confused as
desperate.
And you're right.
Just so desperate.
Lots of despair going around. And so they're like, okay, we're going to muster our business and we're going to head up this hill.
Yep.
And if they knew how to read a topography map, they would see that every line inside those features is a change in elevation, which is normally indicated on the map, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Like, is it every 5? Depending on the map,
right.
It's usually like every 5th line or something. It'll give you the elevation change.
Well, every line. So if you have like a hill,
every line signifies a elevation change, but I think they actually give you the number of what that,
Oh, you mean the distance, like 5 meters, 10 meters?
Yeah, say from elevation of 1400 to 1475 or 1600, every 5th line, and you can see, okay, this is going up, or this is going down.
Right. I really would have liked to see
the map they had.
Right, so I could kind of gauge that, which I did try to find it on the internet machine, but I didn't have any luck. But I really would like to see it because most of the time, especially if it's like a local map, like of the park, it probably didn't have like every elevation marked. It probably said like each line of elevation means this much, this many meters or this many feet.
Yeah, and that's why I said you gotta make sure and look at the legend and see what everything is, so that you don't.
Right, because this is a skill that you have to learn.
Yep.
This is not knowledge you just have on you. You have to learn how to read a map, even a atlas or an interstate map. I mean, there are so many people out there that can't even read those, that have no idea what they're doing, especially in 2021.
Yeah, you got your map in your pocket.
That's right. Yeah, without their cell phone to Google Map it, I know people that couldn't get across town, and to me that is bizarre.
Yeah, and you got to up them survival skills, people.
You do, and it's a perishable skill, and one that you have to make an effort to learn. And so, like when I went to basic training in the military, I only knew very little about how to read a map.
Yeah,
I could understand terrain features. I knew blue was water. I knew green was like forest.
Yeah,
and
or like a dense vegetation area.
Yeah,
or
I know how to follow.
Yeah.
I know how to follow roads. I could gauge like direction and distance to a certain degree of success. But again, I'm not like a professional who goes out into the sticks on foot
with their map and their compass, and you're like,
yeah,
this is all I need.
I'm Lewis and Clark in it. No, I'm not doing that.
No, me neither.
But in the Army, you learn like a great deal more about that type of thing. And it is referred to as land nav. And you use a CADRIG map, which is basically a topographical map. And you learn about all your terrain features and what they mean. So the major terrain features are hill, valley, ridge, saddle, and depression. And then you have spurs and draws, and then cliff, cuts, and fills, which the last 3 are man-made things like that. So when you're driving over a hill and then there's sheer rock on either side, that's a cut, obviously. Somebody cut through that hill to make that road. Just for an instance of somebody wondering, like, what is a cut? That's a cut.
Gotcha.
And you learn to identify these things, and after a while of practicing it, it becomes natural. So you look at a map and your eye is automatically identifying these things as you're, again, it's a perishable skill. So gauging distance and knowing exactly what you're looking at with one gaze at a map, probably going out the window in a couple of years, but I still can't feel confident enough in myself that if I saw a map that I would know how to at least get around.
Well, and I think definitely if you got into a situation where it was life or death, you could, in the beginning, before all of this dehydration and the kind of brain fog and everything that goes with it set in, you can sit down and go, okay, I got to figure out how to get myself or me and my friend or my family out of here. And
Absolutely.
I think anybody that has that skill like you have, you could probably sit down and
absolutely
at least get yourself out.
And yeah, again, anybody with that type of time in practicing a skill like that would know to, okay, first of all, I'm not prepared to go out here into this scenario, into this environment, with only 4 pints of fluid.
Yeah.
I'm not even worried about the package of hot dogs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a calorie dense food. So
Sure.
you're all right with that. If that's all you had to eat overnight, cool. But that much water, it's never enough.
No.
In fact, anytime you take any type of survival based training, they're going to tell you always overpack on water. Just like if you're in the military, you overpack on 2 things all the time. Well, 3 things if ammo is included, but you definitely overpack on socks and you definitely overpack on water.
Yeah.
You do it. Is it more weight? Sure. Are you going to regret that later? Maybe, but
Probably not.
also as you're drinking it, it's getting lighter.
Yes.
Yeah. But
Well, and this becomes the error. Like when you said they start hiking up this hill.
yeah. And so what, again, going back to what I was saying, tying it all together in a neat little bow, I wish I could see that map so you could gauge exactly how big this hill was, because they didn't have an idea. And growing up in a very mountainous, hilly area, I can attest to you, there's this place called Tick Hill back where I'm from. It doesn't look very high, but try to climb it.
Sure.
Yeah. And 10 meters is not a long ways from left to right or horizontally, but it sure is a long ways when you're at a 70 plus degree climb.
Yeah, and you're on
60,
an incline. It's
right.
like, wow. And then that's why I wanted to go back and point to the terrain and the bushes. And like you said, the bushes that have the thorns in them and the yucca plants and all the stuff that's just sticking and poking you.
Oh,
as
yeah.
the rocks, you're slipping, you have all of this. And so it's not just like walking up a hill that's paved.
Mm-hmm.
Each step feels like, in some of these areas that I've been in, it's 2 steps up, you're sliding a step back.
Oh, yeah.
You're 2 steps, you're kind of sliding and working your way up. You're having to crouch and use your hands. You're having to do all these different things. And it's super hot outside, and they have 0 water, and they have no food or little food to replenish the calories that they're burning. And they are just drudging up this hill. And from what I found, it took them around 4 or 5 hours to get up this hill. And think about all of the resources, bodily resources that were just burned.
Yeah, definitely. And if that's not something you're cognizant of, then it's really going to bite you in the back end, because energy, depletes so quickly when you're struggling physically.
Yeah.
And not to mention, it's the mental mindset. They thought for sure they saw something at the top of this hill, and they forced themselves to climb it to find nothing up there. I can only imagine that was a devastating blow.
Yeah.
To their confidence in the situation, which again, even early on in this mishap was very low.
Yeah.
They did not have a lot of confidence. They were scared and desperate. And that was only getting deeper by the minute. And that's, again, very unfortunate.
Yeah. And even if you have the supplies, I know a lot of times that people get in the mindset of, they get so focused on one thing that you forget to drink water, or you forget to eat food or anything like that. And I don't want to bring up the triathlons all the time, but when I'm doing triathlons, I have my watch set to where it vibrates and makes noise on my wrist every 15 minutes. Obviously not in the water, but when I'm on the bike or I'm running. And that reminds me, I need to drink water.
Mm-hmm.
Every 15 minutes that goes off, and I say, okay, I need 3 to 4 good gulps of water.
Mm-hmm.
And every couple of times I'm like, okay, I either need to take a gel or I need to have an energy bar, because I am so focused on what I'm doing. I'm not thinking about,
of course,
eating or drinking or doing anything like that.
Imagine how compounded that feeling would be of not thinking about it when you're also thinking about mortality.
Yeah.
It's very scary.
Yeah. And these guys, I'm saying all this, and these guys had none of those things.
Yeah.
And so that leads us to, what are their secondary thoughts? And that's death.
Exactly. And so they keep drifting away from their camp, which, bringing that up again, they feel safe there. That's where their shelter is. That's where they know the area. They've spent enough time there, but they keep trying to go out and find their way back to no avail. So they don't see anything that's looks like help. They don't see anything that stands out like a major terrain feature or even help in the distance. So they go right back to that camp because they're afraid that they're going too much farther the wrong way, and that's a devastating cycle.
Yeah, I was going to say, imagine how they felt when they got up to the top of this hilly terrain area, and there was nothing.
There was nothing, and you know, it's possible that, especially from a high elevation, they probably could have seen something that might have helped them, but unfortunately they did not.
Yeah, and that's what one of the park rangers said, is that they should have been able to see the trailhead where they came in, or their car or something that could have got back there. But you also have to think to yourself, if one of them got up to the top of it and looked around and said, I see nothing, and they start to panic, or maybe they start having a conversation between themselves about how screwed they are, and then they immediately just start walking back down the hill, then nobody takes the time to kind of, you know, like what I'll say is, like, in a stressful situation, you have to kind of decompress and you have to reset. If you allow yourself to get worked up, the situation can get a lot worse, and that applies to anything.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to put a break in there, and then say, okay, I need to collect my thoughts and we need to reset. I mean, that works for anything.
Yeah.
Up into including arguments with somebody, or situate, like, oh, hold on, let's hit the pause button. Let's reset this thing.
No, that's actually great advice. And if there's one thing that anybody that listens to this should take away, is that it doesn't matter what you're going through, the level of how terrible it is or inconvenient it is. That is such an important piece of wisdom. You really should stop for 1 second, 1 minute, 10 minutes, and look around and come and take a deep breath and look at, and come back and look at what, and take another look. I mean,
yeah,
because when you're stressed out and hungry and thirsty and not getting the result that you want by the effort you put into it, I can just see in my mind's eye, like, they are just so, like, down about it. Like, I can just see they get up there and they're like, oh man, plus we don't know what time of day it was when they got up there.
Yeah. I mean, maybe safe to assume around lunchtime or something like that. But if, you know, these guys are in a situation like we were talking about before the show started, that the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
Yeah, very good point. That's exactly right.
And so the worst thing that's ever happened to me is different than the worst thing that happened to you, and vice versa. And there's no, you know, you don't have to point out, oh, well, what's the worst? But these two guys are obviously in the worst situation that's ever happened to them. So it's easy for me to see how they are not thinking about a way of what's past that.
That's right.
The survival point of, like, okay, I know that if you and I were in a situation like this, one of the things that we would hold on to is probably the motivating each other. But of course, you're in the military and in law enforcement. I was in law enforcement. That's kind of those things that they teach you, the kind of the never give up attitude. And it's nice. I mean, it definitely something that carries on for the rest of your life, but it would take a lot for me. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to say that these guys were weaker weaker minded in any way, but the worst thing that's ever happened to them is this.
That's right. And it culminated in one of their deaths, unfortunately, because
and just the constant back and forth. What I assume would be the constant back and forth of, like, me, if this were, I'm like, Mike, we're going to die. We're going to die out here. Nobody's coming for us. Nobody's going to save us. It's been several days. The park rangers should have already seen our car. They should have already known that our stickers expired. They should have known. Why aren't they coming for us? It'd be because they're not coming for us. They're not coming to get us. Yeah, we're dead.
Despair is a scary place.
It's a stinky cologne.
It is. Nice. It is. And we're not sure who was suffering from that the most, whether it was just one of them and the other one's trying to, like, be positive, or God forbid they both were feeling like that. And they're
just
like
fueling each other.
Right. And, you know, misery loves company type of thing. They were just
negativity
like, crap.
Breeds negativity.
Exactly.
All of that. Yeah.
We're stuck here.
Catchy sayings.
Yeah. All those little proverbs, quips and phrases. But it ended up being terrible. And so David ends up eating some prickly pears, which is great. Yeah. I mean, as long as they're in season.
If they are ripe, which they all, I mean, you're going to have some that, it's no different from a peach tree or apple tree or some are going to be ripe before others.
That's right. Yeah.
That doesn't mean that all of them are ready to eat. It just means that you have to select the ones that are. And I am not in any way a prickly pear expert.
No.
So I don't know how to visually tell if they are ripe, but I do know that it is a difference of bitter and sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Bitter is not ripe, and sweet, they are ripe.
I think I read one time it has a lot to do with the color.
Like the purple?
Like the darker,
the darker they are.
Crimson color.
Because they also, when they bud, they're green.
Yeah. And so I think the darker, like that crimson purpley color is also indicative of their ripeness.
But they got thorns in them, people, so you got to be careful.
Yeah,
they're called prickly pears for a reason.
Hit the nail on the head, bud. But so
that's my win for the day.
He eats it. It obviously, he had a bad reaction, which that could have happened to anybody.
Absolutely.
There are some things that I can't eat, and I'm not even joking, people. If I try to eat sweet potato, you will watch a man gag like a newborn.
Yeah.
It is the weirdest phenomenon. So
it's a texture thing or something?
I don't know.
I don't know.
But all I know is that my brain is like,
no.
Get that out of me right now.
Get that out. Yeah. Well, and I was also wanted to bring up something. I failed to mention it in the other one, but this is the perfect time for it. This is no different than someone in that desperate state where, David could have been tasting these prickly pears and tasting that they were bitter and going, God, these are terrible, but I need this.
Calories, yeah.
I need this. No different than someone stranded at sea. Well, you should know. But if you don't know, let me tell you, you don't drink seawater. You don't drink salt water.
Nope.
It will kill you faster.
That's right.
And
it'll make you sick.
It'll make you so sick, and it dehydrates you even more. And in the dehydration process, it makes you more thirsty. Therefore, you drink more seawater and you die sooner.
That's right.
But people who even knew this, like I was listening to a podcast the other day that was about a Navy ship that was torpedoed or something like that. And these seamen would know not to drink salt water. And a good chunk of them were still doing it because they were so thirsty and so desperate. Mm-hmm. So this is one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I get it. Mm-hmm. I understand where he was coming from
Absolutely.
And what he was doing. But he had a terribly bad reaction to the prickly pears that were.
So compound days worth of hunger and mostly dehydration and despair on top of now probably vomiting and diarrhea.
Absolutely.
That sounds terrible to me.
Oh yeah.
And
especially when you're out in the woods you're out in the desert and it's hot.
Right. It's so hot.
Just think, did you ever see that, I hate to bring up his name because there's so much crap associated with him, that Bill Cosby himself stand up back in the day?
I think I had.
Where he's talking about going out and partying and how at the end of the night you go home and basically you're puking your guts out because you want to quote unquote have a good time and you quote unquote deserve this, to have this good time. And the best thing about the night is when you end and you put your face on the toilet bowl because it's so cool and you have that cool. Imagine being dehydrated and you're vomiting and you might be crapping your pants or whatever. And then there's no comfort anywhere. It's too hot. It's hot even during the night. Like we already said, there's nowhere to seek any sort of comfort whatsoever. The terrain is terrible. So even if you're laying down, you're not comfortable.
Yeah.
You can't be comfortable unless you have like a camping cot or something that you can lay on top of. I don't know if they had one, but you're not comfortable ever.
Yeah.
And these guys are in a situation where they are certain they're going to die. So everything is just elevated to the 10th degree.
I agree with that for sure. And so they lead to them creating some type of suicide pact where they're like, all right, man, I don't want to go out like that and have myself picked at by the birds.
Yeah, get them buzzards going around picking at you, starting with your eyeballs.
I don't want to be around to see that happen to you or vice versa. So what if we just kill each other?
Yeah, we're going to kill ourselves.
Or we're going to off ourselves. And so they try to cut their wrists.
Yeah.
Respectfully. Like each of their wrists, and it doesn't work. The knife isn't sharp.
Well, they say that it's not. They said that it was not, or Raffi said that they both agreed that it was not sharp enough because they were so weak they couldn't do it. But the DA's office that had the pocket knife in evidence said that it was absolutely capable of getting the job done.
See, I was just about to ask that. That was something to me that stood out as strange.
Maybe
even a dull knife could cut your wrist.
Yeah.
People have cut their wrists with less.
Way less.
And so that did strike me as a,
And that's the saying. Like I worked in the jail and I saw some very creative ways at either attempting or successfully committing suicide. And a lot of guys did it with a whole lot less.
Exactly. So
a lot of motivated, if that's the word. I'm not saying that suicide is a good thing at all, but say they're very motivated to get the job done,
right.
and they got it done. That's why I think that even though they created this suicide pact, maybe they were in the back of their mind, both of them were like, oh, maybe I don't necessarily want to do this, but we're both in agreement, right, buddy? All right, let's do it.
Right. And really the only person that knows the answer to that is Raffi. I think that what happened is what happened, and it's really unfortunate. And so David's like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I don't want to armchair quarterback their suicide attempt there, but it definitely.
If the DA is going to come back and say the evidence says that knife was perfectly capable of slitting a wrist, I'm going to go ahead and believe that.
Yeah.
But we don't know. I wasn't there.
Nope.
And so it gets to the point where David is like, I cannot do it anymore. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm going to expire, and I'd rather that you just did it so I don't have to suffer.
Yeah.
This is the worst thing that David had ever gone through, and he has decided that he's done with it. And so Raffi stabs him. It doesn't kill him.
Yeah, he thinks and that was the weird thing is that, I guess not weird thing, but when Raffi is retelling this story and he's talking about plunging the knife down in his chest and he's like, hey, are you still alive? And David's like, yes. I'm like, is this casual conversation really happening, or is this what he constructed in his mind after the fact because it takes him to a place where he feels more comfortable?
I would also have some follow-up questions about how
I definitely
it was casual. So
I'd definitely have to say, like, hold on. Let's rewind that for a second. So you stabbed him in the chest, and you're like, hey, buddy, still alive? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, dang, let's try this again.
Yeah, sorry, man.
Sorry, I must have. Let me try a little bit more to my right, your left.
Right. So the autopsy says that the first hit lunged him.
Yeah.
Hit him in the lung. So we can assume that it put him into a mild form of shock.
Yeah, and I was.
So he was like, oh crap. His body went into shock. So it's actually pretty possible that he casually asked him, are you alive? And he said, yeah.
Well, and I was thinking too, like the reason he might have lunged him is because if you think about putting your hand over your heart to say the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever, we put it over kind of in the center area of the left breast, where your heart is actually not right there. You know, so he may have been like going like, oh yeah, like Pulp Fiction style. He's like, I gotta stab him 3 times. He's like, no, you just gotta do it once. Remember what the yeah. And so he may have stabbed him in that area where you might put your hand over your heart, but it's actually not. Right. It's more center.
And so he's like, oh, okay, so I missed that time. So he gives him the second one and gets the effect he's looking for, but he doesn't die right away. He takes a few moments, unfortunately, and he does expire, as you said. And then he's like, oh, okay.
And then he asked him, are you feeling any pain? And he says, no. And then he says, like, hey, I'm going to cover your mouth or your face to help the process. And then he says that David was like, okay. And that's another, I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah, second red flag for me was, wait, did you also then suffocate him?
Yeah. Were you trying to close his mouth and nose off or what, to get him to this? Because which he didn't know he hit his heart.
Right.
But if he would have, gone through that 10, 15 seconds. Maybe he didn't hit it fully and it took a little bit longer. I don't know because we don't have that information.
Yeah, I'm not an emergency room physician, but
the process is happening.
Right, but I'm going to go ahead and say that pretty much any wound that penetrates one of the chambers of the heart is going to kill you pretty quickly. And by quickly, I mean sometime in the next few minutes.
Well, and is it safe to assume that Raffi knew that he had done that because there was not a third?
Right.
He didn't stab him a third time. Mm-hmm. He was kind of waiting for this second one.
And the autopsy says that the hit to the heart is what killed him. So then he asked, I'm going to cover your face and stuff to basically speed up the process or whatever his thinking was.
Yeah, and he's like, okay.
And then after he expires, he's like, okay. Well, now I'm going to cover you in rocks, which that's smart.
Yeah, it's fine. You know, that's I guess one of the things that I have the easiest acceptance of out of this whole thing, where it's like, okay, after the deed is done and he's killed his friend, which we can talk about more about that later, but then he decides like, okay, I don't want these buzzards to, you know, pick his eyeballs out essentially, because that's what's going to happen. And so he kind of gives him a Old West burial.
He does, but that was something that I flagged as strange. He had the strength to move some pretty big boulders.
Yeah.
Now, a 50-pound rock probably isn't as big as you think it is, but it's still a 50-pound rock.
Yeah.
And some of them were 70, I think you had said.
Yeah, the range was.
So these are good size rocks.
Yeah.
And he was able to do that. And of course, it's important that he did do it, and it
that could have gave him that extra motivation.
The intent of what he was doing is noble.
Right.
You don't want your friend to be, you know, eaten as carrion.
Sure.
Or carrion. Or however you want to pronounce that, but I know what I meant.
Yeah.
And so he does. And so, like, I don't know exactly what happened. I'm just saying that I flagged that as like, he still had enough strength to do that. And I guarantee there isn't just a pile of 50 to 70 pound rocks just laying around. So he had to go retrieve them.
He was searching around to,
right.
You know, and anybody, and this is one of those things, I can't remember what it's called when you stack the rocks to try to leave yourself, if you're walking trails, you know how people will stack rocks on the trails so that they'll know where they're coming, like if you or know where they've been. But if you are doing something like that, like you don't have the ability to flag a tree, because I can tell you, if you just break a small branch on a tree and you're like, I'll remember that, you won't find it again.
No, not unless you're...
Because there's a lot out there and everything looks the same. So a lot of people will stack these rocks, and I'm sure somebody out there is like saying the word right now, but I can't think of what it's called. But you stack those rocks up, so as you're walking to and from, you can... You recognize the stack of rocks, and you're like, okay, but you don't just find a stack of rocks. Like, you go search, find the right rocks that you need. And that's what it sounds like. That's a good point, because I hadn't even considered the fact that he was probably in some capacity traveling around.
Yeah, probably. He didn't have to go like a great distance, but he did have to go find enough rocks to bury a man. You said it was 3 foot across by 7 foot long.
Yeah, the terrain definitely allowed for plenty of rocks. But you would have to still...
So he had to exert the effort to do it. And for a noble cause.
Yeah.
Because in his mind, he did do his friend a service.
Sure.
And really, I guess that's all you could do.
Yeah.
For somebody that was so sure they were on the verge of death.
So absolutely, I mean, just absolutely certain from what Raffi says.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only story that we get.
That is it.
And like I said, I find it hard for myself to get where these guys are, but our experiences are vastly different. And I'm not going to say that these guys didn't truly believe in their minds and their heart that they were going to die.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we've already discussed that, but we can move on.
So he finishes burying David, and then a couple hours, 3 to 4 hours goes by, and a ranger just walks up on him.
Yeah, I can't, dude. That was one of the things when I read that, and just a couple hours later, this ranger strolls up. He's like, "Oh man, you boys lost? Where's your buddy?"
That visibly, like, I actually recoiled, like physically. I was like, "Oh my god, no way!"
Yeah. To
find out that that's how this park ranger is probably just like, "Huh? Sometimes people camp up here."
Yeah.
And to him, this park is, I mean, he probably reads it like street signs. He's like, he knows his park left, right, and center. So he walks up. Oh, hey.
Like the back of his hand, as some people say.
That's right. Yeah. And he walks right up and he's like, "Hey, man, we've been looking for you."
He's probably like,
"You
damn,
lost?
Jerry, we shouldn't have went and got breakfast before we came up here."
No kidding.
We might have saved that fella.
And then he's like, "Where's your buddy?" And he's like,
He's over there.
He's over there. I killed him. And they're like, "I'm sorry, what?"
Excuse me?
Yeah. And, you know,
like you said you killed him.
We have to assume that after a couple of days, you know, he's dirty.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little scraped up.
A little stanky.
He's definitely starting to have, like, the signs of dehydration, like the chapped lips.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some ashiness to, like, his expression.
Yeah.
And so this ranger's like, "What was your
cognitive function is slowing down because, I mean, our body is made up of a lot of water. So if you are dehydrated, that is also going to affect your brain and your thought process. All the cognitive abilities, and I think one of the rangers even said that he was very slow to kind of answer even basic questions where there was like a delay.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Plus, he went through something extremely traumatic.
Very traumatic. He just killed his friend.
Mm-hmm. Thinking he was dooming himself to die, but sparing him the same fate. Yep. And then just a couple hours later, some guy just comes bebopping up the trail.
Just eating some beef jerky, and he's like, "Oh, hey, bud."
Exactly.
And he's like, "Where's your buddy at?" And they're like, "Oh my gosh."
Yes, and to find out that help was that close is devastating. So no wonder he had a delayed response. He's still processing what the hell is it to him. Time was a blur.
Yeah.
And so moving forward, he, for all intents and purposes, he did commit a homicide.
Yes.
A person killed another person.
Intentionally, knowingly.
Right.
That's the way I know. I know that I think New Mexico has a different way of classifying what
the culpability of the offense
is. But he, for what the terms I know, he intentionally, knowingly caused the death of his friend.
Mm-hmm. And was it intentionally, knowingly?
Recklessly or with negligence.
Negligence, yeah. Nice. I would have struggled on that negligence one. But yeah, he did. He was like, I am doing this. I'm going to kill this person but we're not talking about the reason yet.
Mm-hmm.
We just know that a homicide did occur.
Yep.
And so New Mexico wants their version of justice.
Right.
So they want him to pay. What's the most important part of the after story, or the epilogue of this story, is that David's family held no ill will towards Raffi.
Yep.
They were like, what happened. It sounds terrible. It's tragic, and nobody knows that more than you do, so we got no beef.
Which I think really focuses on, or puts an emphasis on, the relationship that David and Raffi had.
Exactly.
Of how good of friends they were when his own family, David's own family, who lost a son or cousin or whatever, says, hey, guys, there's no way that Raffi would ever do anything like this to David out of malice or...
And an investigation from the law enforcement in that area revealed that they couldn't find anyone that ever said that David and Raffi had any type of issues.
Yeah, because I didn't want to hang too much on this in the original episode, or even kind of come across it, but from what I found, they were trying very hard to make this out to be intentional, where they were trying to make it to where there had to be some sort of way that Raffi went on this trip knowing that he was going to kill David.
Right.
And I thought, boy, you're really...
some type of premeditation.
Yeah, I'm like, you're really... I mean, Raffi wasn't even supposed to get to go.
Exactly.
And
yeah, good point.
And once you knew that, and David wanted him to go so bad that he pushed his trip back just to make sure that he could go.
Mm-hmm.
Raffi helped him plan the trip knowing that he wasn't going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the last minute, he gets to jump in the car and take the ride.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, they couldn't even say that they knew for sure they were going to stay at the Rattlesnake Canyon area,
right?
The Carlsbad Cavern National Park. So
it was kind of a last minute decision.
Yeah, they just came off of Austin, which I imagine they had just like a super great time while they were in Austin,
mm-hmm.
and they were like, "Hey, we got to keep pushing forward," and so they take off driving. And if I never looked this up, but if I remember correctly, like Austin to Midland would have been about 6 hours. If they cut over and went to Fort Stockton, it would have been similar. So maybe like, so let's say 8,
mm-hmm.
9-ish hour, 10 hour, 8, 9 hour drive. And they're like, hey, let's just, maybe if they're coming off of Austin, they got a little bit of the Woodhead,
yes.
The hangover, as the Woodhead is a really old term, but, I had a friend that used to say that all the time. And, so they might have got a late start, and, just think it. Also, if you've been cracking cold ones the whole time, that's going to put you in a further state of dehydration.
For sure.
But we'll get to the dehydration here in a minute. But they tried really hard to get to this point where they said they tried to find a motive, and everybody was like, no, nobody could even recall a argument that they got into.
Mm-hmm.
And that's saying something, because you and I are great friends, but we have not agreed on everything.
Mm-mm.
We've never taken an argument to any sort of a unsafe level or anything like that. We usually kind of like walk it back, and we're like, yeah, this is dumb.
Yeah, we did. a misunderstanding somewhere.
Yeah, there's a misunderstanding. We need to go back and discuss this. But they couldn't even find that. Like zero.
No,
nothing.
This is literally a tragedy. And
I think that's when the DA's office was like, maybe plea deal?
Yeah, we'll get a plea deal so we can still send this man to prison for 10 years is what they wanted out of it. And I'm glad they didn't get that because how horrible. But like we've discussed before, these guys don't care about that.
No,
they want convictions.
They're reading what they assume the letter of law is, and they're saying that based off how this law is written, this man is eligible to go to prison for 20 years on a second-degree murder.
That's right. Now,
because they never did find the intent.
Right. And they want that conviction. That's what they're looking for. All the circumstances of the actual incident, I don't think were being taken into account, but they did demand some prison time.
Yes.
And so the judge does, I'm going to give you 15 years, but I'm going to suspend 13 of them. He only ends up doing 16 months, but that's still, guys, that's still 16 months in prison for doing at the time what you thought was a great,
an honorable thing.
An honorable relief for your friend who thought he was dying.
Yeah.
And it's they throw around the term mercy killing.
Yeah.
And I believe that was the intent. Yes, a homicide did occur, but Raffi thought he was helping his friend David pass away in a way that was not going to be a suffer.
Yeah, and I'll be the first one to say I think all of this is crazy. And I think all of it in my head is possibly or not, it was not necessary.
No.
And I don't believe that if I was in a situation like this, I would have done the same thing. But like I said in the part 1 episode, there's no evidence to the contrary.
That's right.
That I can sit here and say, this guy, even though maybe I would have not done things differently, I was number 1, not in that situation. And number 2, I haven't been in a situation like this.
That's right.
I have been dehydrated before. I remember one time I was working patrol and we had huge fires you remember when we had all those fires around here? And I was on evening shift. It was during the middle of the summer. It was hot. I had to direct traffic for hours trying to get all these people. And you're wearing your full uniform. You've got your body, your vest, your bulletproof vest, bullet resistant vest. You got all your stuff. And I was so hot that when I was finally relieved and I got to go home because I got sent in early, I got called in. I got, because we had our take home ride. So they would call us out from the house. And when I got home, I took a really, really cold shower. I was trying to cool off, but I was immediately sick. And I had the chills really bad. And that's when I got the chills, but I was to the touch on fire. I was like, I'm in a bad spot.
Yeah. You got the heat sickness.
Yeah. But I've never been in a situation like them. So I'm saying this sitting in the comfort of my home.
Of course.
But I'm also agreeing with the fact and the point that you were making that I too believe that Raffi thought this was a mercy killing, that he thought he was helping his friend.
Yeah, he was sparing his friend a fate that he didn't want to face.
I will sacrifice my friend to, or not even sacrifice. I will help him get out of this situation through death, but I'm doing him a favor.
And I can't stress enough how preventable this was.
Absolutely.
These seem like two smart fellers.
Yes.
That
educated guys. One was going to.
They just went too far out of their comfort zone into Rattlesnake Canyon.
Yeah.
And got lost. And that's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
Like I was mentioning, a mile is not a long ways, but when you don't know where you're going, it sure turns into one.
Yeah. And what I think was interesting was the fact that when Raffi went to the hospital, he had signs of dehydration, but not dehydration that would have been fatal. And unfortunately for David, he was in the same exact boat.
Right. So they were both, yes, dehydrated, which is a broad spectrum.
Yes.
I was waiting to the end to bring that up. Dehydration is a very broad spectrum.
Did I jump ahead too far?
No, we've got to the end. I'm saying that waiting to talk to it at the end. It's a very broad spectrum because most people, I believe the statistic changes depending on your source, but I believe it's like nearly 70% of all people in America are just dehydrated on the reg.
Mm-hmm.
You're not drinking enough water. In fact, any professional will tell you it's nearly a gallon a day.
Yeah.
Even if you're doing very little, you have to drink a lot of water. You can go up to 2 weeks without food. You can't go 4 days without water. You will die.
Right.
Just in case you didn't know that, there's a little nugget there for you. People, you think you're hungry? You can keep on pushing that back. Your body has the systems built for that, but water gets exhausted quite a bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
And they would find out that both Raffi at the hospital and David at the autopsy were both, yes, suffering from a degree of
dehydration,
but neither of them were nearly fatal. Were going to pass away from it.
Yeah, because they said Raffi bounced back within an hour or two.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure he's on IV, so they're probably like, they have the drip wide open and they're giving him all the fluids but still they were able to say like, I mean, he wasn't about to die. He might have been. And I think that would be kind of hard to judge. I'm not a doctor and I don't claim to be, but I'm sure they had their ways of figuring that out, but I think each person obviously is different, but whatever the case is, they determined. And if we're talking about medical experts, then we have to say, okay, I'm going to go with what they're saying.
Definitely. But I think this has far more to do with a mental mind state. When you're that far down the rabbit hole in despair.
Yeah.
You are all but sure that this rocky, craggy surface will be the place your body will come to rest because you're going to die.
Yeah.
And you've made, in your mind, all the attempts you can possibly muster to find a way to survive. Then what else are you living for?
Yeah.
That's a dark, dark place to be mentally.
And it's absolutely 100% true if you believe it.
That's exactly right. Perception is reality to the individual. So what I see and I feel and perceive, the very same information could be different to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's because that's
why we're having this debate right now.
That's right. We're talking about what it comes down to is we know what happened.
Yes.
We know the facts of the case. We're just breaking it down and looking at scenarios where that maybe didn't have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because for God's sake, people, don't go out into the wilderness of any kind if you're not familiar or comfortable with it. And by comfortable, I mean like you sat down and thought about it.
Yeah.
You're not like, we're going on an adventure. And then you head into the Alaskan wilderness.
Yeah.
Because that goes good for very few people. Or any, like I said, any wilderness. Guys, you have to know what you're doing.
I read a book on that, Into the Wild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, guess what? Spoiler alert, that fella that goes into the Alaskan wild, he did.
He died of starvation, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably been 10 years since
he died of starvation and the bears ate him?
That I'm not sure of. I know, no, they found his corpse in the bus.
In the bus, yeah, okay.
They had to lift it. They lifted that bus out of the wilderness because so many people would try to hike to it and find it. And then also get themselves in a jam. Yeah,
what's his name? Chris McCandless?
I think so, yeah.
I think it was, yeah.
And this also goes back to the Palo Duro Canyon. Like I said,
my Lord.
When I worked in law enforcement, every single year in summertime, if it is June, July, or August, for sure, something bad is going to happen out there because they have signs posted everywhere that says each person should have no less than 1 gallon of water on them. There is a trail down there called the Lighthouse Trail. It's a really cool hiking experience. I think it's 3.5 miles in and then you're 3.5 miles back. So you're 7 total miles. And people will go out there. And if it's, say, 100 degrees outside of the park, it's 115 down in the canyon.
Oh, yeah, 115 plus.
Plus, yeah. And
I've been down there when it was 130.
Yeah, they have thermometers everywhere. They have signs posted everywhere.
You're basically in nature's convection of it.
Yeah, and I will see people walking into that place because I like to ride my mountain bike down there with a bottle of water the size of the one that you have, 16.9 ounces.
That's right.
And I'm like, hold up, is that all you have?
I'm sorry, do you want to die?
And the sad part is that a lot of people die out there. And I say a lot, I mean, at least one.
Too many.
Yeah, too many. Maybe one or two a year. Maybe we get a year where it doesn't happen. But people go in there, and at some point, maybe at the halfway point when they get to the actual lighthouse rock formation, they're like, ooh, wow, I'm in trouble. There was one girl when I was working at the SO, and she was from overseas somewhere. I can't remember, but they were over here, and her friends went down there, and they hiked the trail. She got lost, and these trails are very defined for the lighthouse trails because people are walking them every single day.
Yeah, and there's signage.
There's signs everywhere that kind of show you, but somehow she got lost, and I wasn't working that day, but one of my buddies came across her body 100 feet or 100 yards from the trailhead. She had almost made it back, and she collapsed. And when he found her, she was dead.
Yeah.
And there was no bringing her back. And the saddest thing I think was I came back to the office, and I was in our muster room, and they had like her phone and her camera and some stuff like that. And I remember looking on her camera, and there were pictures of her hanging out with her friends, having a good time, smiling, all this, 45 minutes or an hour before she was dead.
Dead, yeah.
And that was so, like, that kind of hit me in a way. I was like, golly, 45 minutes before she died out in the elements. Her and her friends are snapping pictures of each other. They're having a great time. They're traveling together, just like these two gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
And then, or right after that, she's gone forever.
That's right. They just got lost and couldn't come back from it. And that happens a lot. Way more than it should. These should be things that people are teaching their kids that are posted, which, to be fair, they are posted in a lot of places. Make sure you have a lot of water. Don't go into places you're not familiar with unless you're skilled enough to do such a thing. It's very, very serious. And even like in the military, if you show up there, like in basic training, they ask you who can read a map. And then they're like, show me how you can read a map. Turns out you can't really read a map. You know, it's easy to like go on an atlas. You know, a lot of people, when they think of maps, in my opinion, from what I've done, they think of like a road map.
Road map, yeah.
You take this interstate to this highway to that interstate, and then you're in Colorado.
Yeah.
That's
I was
great.
about to say, look at a shout out to all our listeners in the DFW area, because I've noticed it has picked up a lot.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
But if you...
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you all very much. And everywhere else that's tuning in. But if you look at a picture of the DFW interstate or highway system,
goodness.
I'm like cross-eyed.
It looks like a spider's web.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. I don't know how y'all do it. Plus, y'all's traffic is murder.
Yeah.
But don't go into places you're not capable of handling. And you know what? If they didn't have to go a mile down that trailhead.
Absolutely not. They could.
That's really unfortunate.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's really unfortunate they didn't decide to just go just a little off the beaten path.
Just 100 yards maybe, and
just 100 yards is 300 feet.
Yeah.
And as we just discussed, someone could get lost in less than that.
Yes, that's true.
And
I guess throwing up the tent next to the car isn't camping.
No, of course it's not. I'll agree with that.
You would think that.
But also, I would never want to sleep in a tent in anything called a canyon.
No.
In the southwest United States. But I'm biased because I've lived here for some time and I've tried to camp around here. And it's miserable.
Yeah, the sun down here during the summertime is literally trying to kill you.
Yes, I feel that deep in my core zone.
Yeah. But
learn to read a map. I'm sure that you could learn to do it on YouTube or on the internet, especially if you're going to go to a new place. Please familiarize yourself with your surroundings. In my opinion, you should be doing that everywhere you go anyway, because that's just smart.
Yeah.
What if there's a fire? What if there's any type of violent incident and I need to bug on out of here?
Yep.
Know where you're going with the most information you could possibly gather, and you will never, ever regret that one time. I guarantee you will always feel comfortable knowing where you're going.
Yeah.
It's just another layer of that security blanket when you try to cultivate a survivor mindset.
Yeah, and if I'm going anywhere with either my friends or by myself, say my family, one of the things that I always think about is, what if something goes wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And I may just start playing scenarios of anything.
Oh my
I don't
goodness.
even know what the what ifs could be.
No.
But I may think about, okay, if we're going camping, I may say, okay, how can I avoid getting myself into a scenario that I could avoid if I just thought my way through it in the beginning, before I left my house, while I'm still in the comfort of
That's
my
right.
home, before we put, the tires on the road. What can I do to make sure that something bad doesn't happen? That's not going to necessarily save you all the time, but at least maybe, you have some forethought about.
You really should. And that's not a negative outlook. I've heard people be like, wow, that's paranoid and overtly negative. And I'm like, no, because yeah, I mean, could it be translated that way? You just think something bad's always going to happen. No, I don't think that something bad is going to happen, but I sure as heck would like to have a plan when something could or does.
Absolutely.
It's like having a spare tire.
Yeah.
Do you want to have it and not need it, or need it and not have it?
Yeah. Having a go bag.
Mm-hmm.
Having you a bug out bag.
I do.
Something like that.
Me and the esposa both have one.
Yeah.
And when my kids get old enough, they will have one.
Yep.
And that's just the way it is. Not because I want something to happen, but because how much does it really hurt to have something like that?
Very true.
Earthquake kits. Earthquake kits were a big thing growing up. I just remember watching videos on it, or natural disaster kits, or blackout kits.
I thought that was going to be such a bigger problem when I was in elementary school.
You know what? And that's the problem when no one is talking about it. Mm-hmm. We should have those things because, real quick, we live in Amarillo, Texas. There's a Walmart not far. It's a supercenter not far from my place. And every single time they talk about a bad storm coming, guess what happens? That store gets wiped out.
Yeah.
And if it's winter storms, like a blizzard.
Oh, yeah.
That place is stripped down to the bones. Them shelves are barren.
Just bare.
Every bottle of water, every flavored bottle of water, even that stuff that tastes like somebody rinsed off a strawberry into a cup.
Yeah.
That is gone.
Exactly
every fluid that can be drank is gone.
Yep.
And you're stuck there like, wow, if I needed water, I certainly wouldn't have it. And the storm doesn't even have to happen. Nope. It just has to be talked about happening. So maybe the lesson here is I learned I should already have some of that laying around.
Mm-hmm.
Dried goods, canned goods, your dry staples and your canned staples, your vegetables and your potted meats and things that have a long shelf life. Yeah. Everybody should have...
Get some freeze-dried stuff if you can.
Everybody should have a little section of that in their home for, when I think that the most normal term is when the poo hits the fan type of it's just part of the mindset that I think people should practice more to be prepared for something like that. Know where you're going with the best of your ability. Have the resources you need to survive when you get there. Always overpack your water and socks.
Yes.
I mean, that's just good advice for anybody.
Absolutely.
If I'm going somewhere for 3 days, I pack 6 pairs of socks. I'm not really taking that much more room or that much weight, but I'm not going camping with the chance that I'm ever going to have wet feet because I don't like it.
Yeah, it's miserable. Yeah. So, is there anything else on your notes that you want to...
No. I just want to say this is a tragedy. I do believe that this was a mercy killing in its intent. I'm very sad that he had to do any prison time at all because he already went through his own... He's going to have that in his brain.
He has to carry that around forever.
And
not only that traumatic experience of being exposed in the elements and being hopeless and devastated, but also he killed his best friend.
Thinking he was doing the right thing for a dude to trounce up a couple hours later and be like, hey, man, y'all been missing.
Yeah.
So
good thing I found you.
Wait. And that's just a good time to cover all the things we talked about. Know where you're going to the best of your ability. Learn to read a map. Pack too much water. pack too much socks, you're never going to regret those things.
Be aware of your surroundings.
To the best of your ability.
And make sure if you get in a bad situation to calm down as much as you can. Just take a pause, rethink what's going on. Use your OODA loop if you need to.
That's right.
We've talked about that before. And that really kind of, for me, I think focuses my mind, what I'm doing and where I need to go, and just, be prepared. I think that's the biggest takeaway from all this. Whatever your prepared is, be prepared before you take on anything like this, because in a story like this, we found out, the tragedies that can happen. And I know there are tons more. I listened to a podcast that just talks about people dying in the wilderness.
That's right.
And so it happens quite often, but I wanted to do this case because I'm familiar with the area.
Right.
You and I actually did some work in Carlsbad ourselves.
That's right. Yeah. We've been through there a few times and have traveled through there many more times than we've worked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We went through eastern New Mexico all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I thought when I came across this, I was like, it was a few weeks ago, and I was like, man, I need to put that on the list because I'm familiar with that area, and I can also talk about, because I've been in the exact same place.
That's right.
That they have been in the exact same time frame as far as the year goes.
I know it.
And it is so hot and so miserable. I remember I was working on some gas pumps out there, and it was during the middle of the summer, and I was on a caliche pad, and I was like, oh my gosh, it was horrible. I was out there for like 8 hours.
Yeah, I'm not joking when I say it's a nature's convection oven.
Yes.
All that heat is just radiating right back at you.
Yep. Man, so, all right. Well, I think that is where we are going to leave it for this time. But we're so glad that you guys tuned in and listened to us, and we'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.
See ya.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into the episode. We're so glad to have you guys with us and listening. We can't explain how grateful we are that our episode downloads keep going up. Our listeners, the volume of listeners we have keeps going up in all different areas of the world. It's really exciting, and
very exciting.
We can't thank you guys enough for that. If you are looking for us on any of the social medias, we are on Facebook at The Murder Project. If you need to search for us, we're at facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're searching for us on the old Instagrams, we are at The Murder Project. And if you are on Twitter, you can search for us at The Murder Pod. Also, as usual, we would like to mention that if you could, go on to whatever platform you're listening on and give us a like or subscribe, whichever way that it's on there. I did notice this week that over half of our listeners are not subscribed to whatever channel or whatever platform they're listening to for our channel. And if you could please do that, that would help us out a whole lot. While you're there, make sure and leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. I would really like to read some of those reviews after we get a few more. And hit that 5 stars if you think we're worthy of it.
5 stars, people.
5 stars. Okay.
We are out here. We are doing the damn thing.
We are doing it, and we hope we're bringing you guys content that you like. But if you don't say anything, we don't know.
That's right.
We're assuming that we're doing a good job, so we're going to hold tight right there. If you want to drop us an email and let us know how we're doing, if you want to do a little longer form comment, you can email us at you can email us at contact@themurderproject.com. We appreciate everyone listening. We look forward to talking to you again. But before we go, please remember,
head up, eyes up,
and stay alive.